Welcome to our channel, Million Dollars Made Easy. On this channel, we create spreadsheets and run numbers for you just to show you the miracle of compound interest in this video. We use the actual historical returns to the S&P 500 for the last 100 years, and we simply project what similar returns might do for you in the future. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just someone who wants to help. And when you see these numbers, you are simply going to be amazed. This is a graph that's often been used by people, showing you just what happens if you can just get started and get this snowball rolling for compounding effect. For example, this was somebody that could save 10,000 a year at a 7% interest rate. It would take us 7.84 years to reach 100,000. To reach the second 100,000, only take you 5.1 years. And progressive, you can see over and over again, it takes less and less time to reach that next $100,000 milestone. And like for example, from going from 900,000 up to a million only takes 1.35 years. Why did it take 7.84 the first? Because a lot of it was your money. It was money you were putting in. So this blue is the money you're putting in. This purple right here is the money that your nest egg is returning as time goes on. The longer you're in the market, the more the compounding effect takes over to the point where right here, if we look at these actual numbers, what I've done is run this at the 7% return, the $10,000 going in there each year. And after 30 years, this row right here, you would have been put in 31.8% of the money, which is the blue right here. And your returns on that money would have returned 68 point, more than double what you put in. And then see the ultimate result getting up here. It's not quite a million because actually, if you run these numbers, it adds up to 30.84 years, I think it is, or 30.74, something like that. Takes just short of 31 years to get to that $1 million. So again, right here, after 30 years, you're going to have $944,000 given these numbers, 7% return. I want to look at it a different way, folks. I want to take this same scenario. Here's the 10,000 each year, 7% interest rate. After 30 years, you got that same 944,000. Again, it takes just short of 31 years to actually get to a million. But folks, this is running it at 7%. I want you to notice something. I'm not quite sure why they always run it at 7% because in actuality, if we look at what the S&P 500 has done over the last 100 years, I ran it for a 30-year period. Over that 30-year period, $10,000 a year, you put in $300,000 over that 30-year period. And folks, in the worst case scenario, you'd have 1.197 million, almost $200,000 more than what actually $250,000 more than the 944,000 right here with the 30 years after 30 years at 7% interest. Folks, you're going to get more than that if the market continues doing what it's been doing for the last 100 years. I want you to see the actual breakdown. 100% of the time you had over a million. This is after 30 years. 77% of the time, color coded in blue down through here, you're going to have 1.5 million. And 52% of the time, just putting the money in the S&P 500, you're going to have over $2 million color coded in gold. We can go down through here. Again, we're looking at this 30-year column going down through here. Look at these numbers, folks. 100% of the time, color coded in green, you have over a million. 77% of the time, color coded in blue, you have over 1.5 million. And 52% of the time, color coded in gold, you actually have over $2 million. So the compounding effect of the S&P 500 over the last 100 years, you'd be so much better off than this 7% return that they're running these numbers at, showing you get to 944,000 after 30 years. Again, a worst case scenario, you get 1.2 million. That's actually 1952 numbers going down through here. The 1952 numbers, if we go ahead and reset it, right now you see the graph going straight, or you're just going a nice even amount right there. How about if we run the 1952 numbers? Let's go ahead and reset that to the actual numbers. Here we can see them going down through. There was up years, down years. It was kind of jagged here. You can see it going there. But look what you ended up with, folks, in the end. You ended up with 1.197. Again, these are 1952 numbers. And this is the worst case scenario in the last 100 years. If we pick some of these other years, you can see the graph. kind of bouncing around. But in this case, you'd be use 1947 numbers. After 30 years, you have 1.671 million. One of those periods that you'd actually have more than 1.5 million, which you'd have over 77% of the time. Again, when you just look the 7% average, which is what this graph was doing, 110,000 annual savings, 7% interest rate, you end up with that. But if you just use the S&P 500 for the last 100 years, in the worst case scenario, which we saw in 1952 numbers, you have 1.157. But look at some of these other ones, 2, 3. The maximum you'd actually find is almost 5.3 million, and the median in this column is 2.157 million over that same relative 30-year period. In this case, it was 31 years, but we're just looking at the 30-year graph. That shows you the compounding effect that just using the S&P 500. Oh, if we just had a straight 7%, it would look kind of even right here. You end up with 944,000. But once we look at the S&P 500, any of these years, even the worst case scenario, 1952, the graph would be bumpy, but look where you end up with. You end up with $250,000 more than just running it at 7% interest. That's why I want people to see these numbers, show you. Sometimes they run them lower than I think they ought to be running them at 7%. They ought to be running them at the actual returns that we've had over the last 100 years in the S&P 500, 1.197 using 1952 numbers. Worst case scenario, you can see it right there. Median being 2.157. But again, folks, the compounding effect is just incredible. Oh, it might be a bumpy ride. You might like to see these numbers instead, to see a nice smooth graph, but you don't end up with near enough. You end up with 944,000, whereas in the worst case scenario, using the S&P 500, though it's a bumpy ride, you end up with 1.197 and the median $2.157 million. But anyway, either way, you can see you want to get it in there, get it working for you, and see how the graph just takes off. Whether you use a 7% graph or whether you use the actual graph for 1952 numbers, which is bumpy, or any other scenario we use here, you can see it takes off. But look at how it takes off. That's the compounding effect of the S&P 500 over the last 100 years using 1958 numbers. 30-year, $1.65 million. Anyway, I just wanted to show you that the compounding effect. Don't just look at 7%, ended up with these kind of numbers. The S&P 500 has averaged at least 10% over the last 30 years. Look at this, 30 years, 1.644 with the 10%. Look at the kind of graph numbers you can have now. You're not needing to put in near as much, and yet you end up with these kind of numbers with just running a 10% return. How about a 9% return? 1.363. You're putting in 22% of the money, and your money's returning is 78% of this total value right here of 1.363. We could run all kinds of different numbers, but I just wanted to show you using actual numbers from the S&P 500. Please consider subscribing to this channel. Please let people know about this channel. Please like the videos, and thanks so much for watching.